From Beyond Marketing, it's the 20-Minute Call, a podcast about the dreamers, boundary pushers, rebels, and champions of the skydiving industry. Each episode is a narrative journey highlighted by the highs, lows, and luck that the skydiving industry delivers, as told by the most influential people within the sport. If you've ever dreamed of becoming a skydiver, perhaps opening a drop zone, or becoming the next world champion, check out the 20-Minute Call hosted by me, James LeBarry. My guest today made his first jump in 1984 and has since gone on to build a successful career as a competitor, coach, and multi-dropzone owner. Between 1991 and 2004, he served as the team captain of the Swiss national teams and became a 12-time Swiss champion. He competed in 6 world meets, which was highlighted by a 5th-place finish at the 2001 World Meet in Spain. He also served as coach for the Austrian national team between 1997 and 1999, and the German 8-way team in 2004, which would go on to compete in 2 world meets under his guidance. Though a highly decorated competitor, today's guest is most well known for his entrepreneurial success as the founder of GoJump in Gransee, Germany, and now most notably as the owner of GoJump Oceanside, Las Vegas, and Hawaii. Mike Vetter, welcome to the 20-Minute Call podcast.
Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you for being here. How does it feel, or how does that resonate with you as you hear in 2 paragraphs amazing amount of achievement through your life so very quickly?
Yeah, it was a long road to come from originally starting to jump in 1984 and until today with a lot of different perspectives, but all related to skydiving, really.
So, Mike, you're originally from Switzerland, is that right?
That's correct, yeah.
Were you in the military in your youth or when you were younger?
Well, Switzerland, at least by then, it was necessary to join the military when you turned 19 or 20 years old. So I served the initial 17 weeks. That's the initial training. And then by then, it was every year, it was 3 weeks a year, recurrency training. So I was in the Swiss military for about 10 years, yeah, until I turned I think 28 or 30 years old.
So was your introduction to skydiving during that time, or was it before then?
No, not at all. My introduction was actually by my dad when I was 5 years old. I kind of forced him to drive me to a drop zone where I was born. The town was called Gransee in the middle of Switzerland. And he drove me there when I was 5 years old. And since then, I was attracted to the jumping, visited the drop zone many times, and then I had to wait till I was 17. That was the legal age back then in Switzerland. And 5 days after the 17th birthday, I started my course with the static line.
I mean, what appealed to you of skydiving at such a young age?
Well, I'm still thinking about that, and I'm also writing in it in my book about it. But I think it's the freedom. It's really the freedom of flying and the freedom to be up there and away from all the noise, in a sense, down here. So that was always a big part of it. And then later on, it became obviously more the challenge of competing and be precise in the free fall. But I think the freedom is the main feeling that I still feel about our sport.
Are you still actively jumping quite a bit?
I haven't actually been jumping in 8 years, so I kind of stopped it when I came to the US. That's kind of the interesting part, but I don't think I go back to jumping anymore. My oldest son is now the big skydiver in the family. He's just turned 20 and has already 5,500 jumps.
And a tandem instructor as well.
Yeah, he's full-time instructor here in Oceanside in the location as well, yeah.
Amazing. In my preparation for our interview today, there's a theme that's really come out to me about you, Mike, and that is family is very important to you. I noticed that you honor your mother by referencing her on one of your airplanes. Can you just talk a little bit about your family?
Yeah, I believe, and this is actually the big story of my life, I believe, because I lost my father when I was very young. I was 12 years old when he died to initially lung cancer. It was a a very intense experience for myself, and kind of made everything possible that came after in my life, because it was such an impressive experience in my life when I was so young that it kind of took the fear away from me that nothing more extreme could happen in my life than losing my own father. So that was definitely an important thing in my life. And then family in general, I believe I have 2 brothers and 1 sister as well. And everybody has quite a few kids. Like one brother has 3 daughters, the other one has 2 sons, and then my sister has 2 children. We have 4 children. So it's kind of important in our family in general, I believe, yes.
You mentioned when your father passed away that it was the end of your childhood. It must have been a very difficult time, but it seems that you've used that to fuel yourself, your direction. Can you expound on that when you say that it was the end of your childhood? What did it do for you?
Well, this is referring also to a book from Dr. Edith Eger. She's living now in La Jolla. She's 95 years old. She originally went to Auschwitz, was deported back in, I think, 1944 it was. And she's writing about that, and ask these 2 questions, basically. When did your childhood end, and when would you like to be married to yourself? And that experience is just all the happiness and the lightness of childhood, I believe, changed at that moment, because it was kind of like an experience of throwing into the real life experience that came, in my opinion, came way too early. Well, in our lives as brothers and sisters, but I can only speak for myself in that sense, but definitely for myself. So it's changing that lightness of your childhood into kind of a seriousness, experience. And that's I believe that's what, has the, or is the reference I'm pointing out in this.
When people of that young age lose a parent that young, sometimes, there can be, with that pain, go down a negative road, but it seems like you just, it fueled you. I know that you made your first jump in 1984. Was that for yourself? Was that part of, anything more? What led to that experience of jumping for the first time?
I believe the jumping is independent from that experience with my father. It was there. I don't know exactly why, because nobody in my family ever jumped or was a flying career or something. It was just in my genes, I guess, that I really wanted to skydive and always saw that sport as something really special and interesting. In the other way, the experience with my father when I was 12 years old, I feel like I'm more talking about not so much the fear of jumping out of a plane, but the fear in life general, that, you can lose things in life, and not losing your life, but in a sense, building up a business like GoJump America. There were many situations in the last 17 years when I started it that, it's you're on the edge with things, and fear could stop you from going on and making it a bigger endeavor. And that's what I'm, trying to explain as well in the book, and that's what I believe, was helping me. It freed me in a sense that I lost my father young, to the point that I was free to do whatever I felt was achievable in my life.
Let's fast forward then. You make that first jump in 1984, and you have a very successful career in the sport. And then I've read that you started a drop zone or managed a drop zone in Spain. Just give us a sense of that career as a competitive skydiver, and then opening your first drop zone.
Well, the competitive spirit, I don't know. I think initially got fired up through Tom Pires when I watched his videos back in 1989, I think that was the year. And it really fascinated me. And somehow I believed we could become champions, and motivated 3 other people. 2 didn't even have the license in 1990. And I motivated them to join the team. And we went to the land and trained 4 months together with Pires, and were able to live in his house as well. It was a great experience. And he coached us to the first national title in 1991. By then, it was a super big surprise that we were able to achieve that. So these competitive years in the first place, it just fascinated me, the perfection in four-way. to be as precise at 120 miles and 4 people together, constantly changing the situation. I mean, every jump is completely different. Every formation is different because everybody is contributing in some way to that formation. So that was just the 90s, basically, was the competitive time for me, and I really loved it, and we jumped a lot. And then after 2001 in Spain, in Seville, the World Championship, I kind of stepped away a little bit more from the jumping, the competitive jumping, and was looking to do something going forward with all the experience I had. So in the first couple of years, I was doing more coaching. And then 2003 it was, I went to Spain and started managing the Dropzone in Leo in Spain. It was kind of the same way, like almost like the competition in another environment. So for me, it was similar, like to achieve, make things better, grow with it. And that was my first experience as a Dropzone manager in end of 2003 to end of 2004.
Mike, I've noticed that when I think of highly competitive people, you can sometimes see or feel that competitiveness in their personality. But you appear to me, and I don't think that we've ever spoken face to face as we are now, very calm, very measured, yet you are doing very big things. How do you find that balance to compete at the very top of the sport or the top of the business in the sport and also remain centered?
Well, first of all, to be honest, what you see in the outside is not necessarily what's inside. It's one of my big challenges in life, and I'm had the feeling it was important to speak about that in my book, and that's coming out soon. But it's that constant finding the balance, living in the moment, and for me that was when I experienced 1996 or 1907 was the Taoism, the Chinese philosophy. That really helped me to center more inside versus the competitive spirit in the outside. And based on an experience we had when we were trying to get together a new team in 1994, we did also some analysis of our riding. And especially for me, what came out was that my riding was pretty much the same like Reinhold Messner, which the person did analyze before, and Reinhold Messner, I'm pretty sure most of people don't still know him. He was the first person achieving all the, I don't know it in feet, but all the mountains in the Himalayas that are above 8,000 meters without oxygen. So he was the first person to be able to do that. And in a way, that was my, capability of achieving things. But on the other hand, it was also defined as like if you're on the high mountain, you go look for the next higher mountain. So there's never, arriving at some point that you feel like actually the happiness and achievement. So the Taoism itself, is hard to describe in words, but I think the simplest way to say it is just follow the flow of the water and let things evolve, which doesn't mean like you're just passive and waiting. It's actually the opposite, but you just don't force it. So it's happening more. And I think that's in general a really nice way of putting it together. And for me, it helped me a lot to combine these competitive sides that I have inside of me and will never go away, I think, in a human being anyway, which is a good thing. But on the other hand, to be calm, like especially with, my 4 children, being at home is a different world than, competing on highest levels. So to combine these things like company, the competition, the family, and that's my big thing that I found, it's now 25 years ago, and I'm still trying to live by as much as I can, day by day.
You mentioned Taoism. There are, for example, on the tails of your aircraft, symbols that I believe, if I'm not mistaken, relate back to this philosophy. Am I correct in saying that?
That's absolutely correct. Yeah, and I started doing that a while ago. For me, it's just there's more in life than just work hard. I believe a lot of things we achieve anyway is kind of coincidental. Where we are born, defines what we are able to achieve. So the dial symbols on the aircrafts give the aircraft itself, but also all of us in the company, all the customers we touch, a certain spirit in a way that is positive, and that we hopefully have good days day by day. That's kind of the feeling that's in this, and you find it everywhere in the company, on the aircraft, and in different ways, and that's important for sure.
A quick break here to address the Dropzone owners listening to the pod. If you're a DZO, then you know the insanity of taking your passion and making it your business. Why'd you do that? Running a DZ is hard. Between the stressors of liability, 30-day payment terms on fuel after 4 weeks of miserable weather, and angry staff who are convinced they've been skipped in the rotation, you need a tool that helps reduce your stress. Enter Burble Software. All right. Conceived by a DZO who's been in the trenches just like you, Burble is the most sophisticated manifest and booking software on the planet. Your life as a DZO is hard enough, so don't be that DZO who tries to save a few bucks using software that wasn't built for us. Burble, the must-have Dropzone management software for the 182DZ to the multi-turbine monster. Burble. When you were running that or operating the Dropzone in Spain and then a couple of years later establishing GoJump in Germany, did you have a lot of business experience prior to that? Or what shaped your business philosophy?
I didn't have any experience. I'm not coming from an entrepreneur family as well. I have a couple uncles that had businesses, smaller ones, local ones. I did it by, learning by doing, in a sense. And I strongly believe in living in the moment. So achieving big things come from, focusing on the moment, do the little things all the time, and repetitive, especially in a business like we do, like repeat stuff and build from what you're learning, and be brave. I think that's the most important thing. If you're coming from nothing, and I started really the business at nothing. I mean, I had literally $5,000 back in 2006 when I started GoJump brand in Germany, and learned it on the way. The only thing I have is a banking background. I originally had an apprenticeship in Switzerland, 1983 to 86, where I learned, in a way, the banking business and the basics, which is good, to understand numbers and be able to put together a business plan. But that's about it. That's about my experience I had when I started.
What would you say has been your biggest, let's say this, if I were to come to you and say, Mike, I'm wanting to start a Dropzone, what would you say is the biggest lesson that I should learn in order to have the success that you've experienced?
That's a good question. Yeah, I probably would ask that person to sit down for 6 hours and watch what's happening. And then, if you would see Oceanside like yesterday, we did 17 loads, 103 tandems. By the way, airspeed is training in Oceanside right now, so that was kind of interesting, together with the interview today. And, you would probably get a feel for, wow, that's really smooth. It's really running, precise, almost like a watch, Swiss watch, I would call it. And to achieve something like this, I think you need a lot of patience in all aspects. Like, you need to have patience, to train your people, to explain everybody what you're actually looking for them to do. Is it an instructor, a packer, a pilot, office, whatever? The same what I said before, start with the little things first. Don't try to be big in the first place. And start building it up, and that starts with a lot of small things in the first place, like how it looks like, how it feels like, the environment. There's a lot of things you need to understand. I think to run a nice Dropzone, it needs time. I think if you're patient, that's probably the most important thing.
When you started GoJump in Germany in 2006, as you mentioned, just starting out with $5,000. What do you think that you did differently or most successfully that allowed that Dropzone to scale the way that it did?
I really honestly believe the biggest question you should ask yourself in any business, Dropzone specifically, is how would you like to experience as a customer when you arrive at that Dropzone? yourself, like when you go to a hotel or whatever. So if you try to see your business from the customer perspective, from A to Z, like from the start to the finish, I think then you can start really look into things that make that experience better. And that's what I did in Germany first. There were a lot of things, would be too big to explain it here, but a lot of things, that were against that. Like, I give you a small example. Like, there were a lot of, I don't know if that's known here in the US actually, but there are a lot of chains, like red and white chains they use on construction sites, that were put up basically to tell the customer, don't go here, don't do this, don't do that. So it was always a negative thing. That's just a small example. To not do things where I believe exactly the opposite. The customer is the one that should experience ourselves from the inside. I mean, there's obviously a limit where they can go, or they can't go to an aircraft that's running, but without an instructor. But in general, it should be a really open house. Like, you invite somebody in your house at home and give the customer that feeling. And if you see it from that perspective, you can start building it from there. What is needed that the customer has this experience? And for us, for example, that means like we have a large call center in Las Vegas with 6 full-time employees, where a lot of other companies, I mean, these days it's hard to find a phone number on a website because nobody wants you to call them because it's cost. And we are completely the opposite. We want the customer to experience us first before they even arrive at the drop zone, to get that good feeling from the first place. So I think that's the main thing I did in Germany, basically make the drop zone welcoming, and then start, all the other stuff like marketing and get things going. Because if you promise something to the customer in the marketing, he should experience it at least as good as when he arrives. So if you have a great marketing and everybody feels like that's great, and then you go there and feels like, ooh, that feels completely different, then you will not have a successful business, because there's no more, there's no reviews, there's no people coming back, and that's kind of the base is the feeling that the customer has in the experience.
I will say, as someone that is very big about customer experience, it makes me so happy to hear that, because it's, to me, that exceeding expectations of a customer creates word of mouth, which is so powerful. Mike, in owning a drop zone, it is filled with highs and lows. There's obviously a lot of stress involved as it relates to people getting injured, or just weeks and weeks of bad weather and the finances, etc. But I read that in 2010, one of your aircraft, I don't know that I could say that maybe any DZO would actually be able to say this, but one of your aircraft was hijacked. Would you enlighten me on this story?
Yes, I mean, it's actually something I would love not to be able to talk about, because it was such a crazy experience. And it was 6 days before the birth of my second son. It was kind of a crazy thing. That was the first winter I rented out the plane. I bought my first plane in 2008. And obviously Berlin in the winter, we couldn't fly. So I started to rent it out that winter, the first time to the south, to Portugal. And long story short, somebody rented the aircraft from them, basically, and then wanted to take a few pictures on a flight to Lisbon. And 2 jumpers joined them. And then after 15 minutes into the flight, he pulled a gun and put it on the head of the pilot and gave him a note that the jumpers have to leave. And so they had to jump, and it was very low. But they made it out on a reserve canopy, so that was good. And then he forced the pilot to jump, and he said he's going to take over the aircraft. And the pilot refused to jump, so they were fighting over the gun. And, it's really like Hollywood, but it really happened like this. And then they crash landed into a small airfield. And my pilot was able to jump out of the door and took the gun. And then this guy had a big bag in the back of the pack. And then they had a rifle in there, and he shot himself in my plane, committed suicide. And that was the end, kind of the end of the story, But it put me, besides the experience, it put me in a really, really bad spot, because back then we were still pretty small, and an aircraft was a big deal for a company like us, for Dropzone, and it was only like 6 or 8 weeks to the start of the season, and had a basically destroyed aircraft sitting somewhere in the south of Europe. all the stuff that comes with it, and then the insurance didn't pay, and it was a fight for 3 years. And the only reason they paid at the end was that I still had the war and hijack insurance on there, because originally we did that for the ferry from New Zealand to Europe, because we were flying through a few countries with the possibilities, but you would never think to have that for a skydive operation. But that at the end saved me, because they had to pay. I forced them in court, and long story. It's all in the book too, but managed to get back on my feet. Well, it was a tough time, yeah.
What type of aircraft was it?
It was a PAC 750, and it was only 2 years old. By then they were, I think, $1.4 million. And that was a small business still. It's very tough. I mean, if something like this happened that you can't believe, and I had to go down there and then just made it back for the birth. 2 days before he got born, I was back in Germany, and so everything worked out. But it's that part of entrepreneurship, I believe, people can't see. In the skydiving business, I think, is even higher on that pressure, because we have a few things we need to deal with as Dropzone owners. Obviously, the weather that can change a day completely from a great day to nothing. Things like that, it can basically put you out of business and leave you with a lot of debt. And it's not even your fault. You didn't do anything wrong, But so that's tough, yeah.
What was your mental state in that time? Because we can look back and think, oh wow, you did well. You came out of that okay. But as entrepreneurs, when we're in crisis, the responsibility is all on your shoulders. Obviously, losing a major aircraft like that, it makes one wonder how you ever even continued as a Dropzone owner. Just share with me the mental state that you were in during that time, as you're about to have a baby on the way just days later.
I think it depends how strong you are internally, I believe. There's a book that I read later, Ben Horowitz, The Hard Things About the Hard Things. And it's basically, he's talking about these two CEOs. One is the freedom CEO. That's when everything goes nice, and you kind of, think about maybe, do a team event, and, you chatty and everything is great. And then there's the war CEO, that's when you have to go into the tunnel. And there's nobody else that can save the company in that moment. So it's only you, and all the pressure is sitting on you. And you can't share it with anybody. You can't share it with your wife. You can share it with your best friend, because nobody really understands how serious this is. And nobody is able to, help you solve that problem that is basically life-threatening. Not in the sense of dying, but life-threatening of your life with family and everything, if you're going to make it or not. That is very nicely described, I believe, how you can survive situations like this, if you are strong enough to do that. And he's talking about most of people are just not strong enough to go into, that position and basically, do it step by step. And that's how I solve problems when they're really big. Like last year was a really challenging year as well. And I'm trying to look at it from the outside and then, okay, what's the next step? And don't see the big picture. A little bit the same like I explained about building a drop zone. You don't necessarily want to have that huge picture and say, like, I do all the same, all at the same time. It's like, okay, what's first? So for me, first was to get back home, to have a nice birth of my son. That was my first priority. And then from there, I started to work, piece by piece. My first priority was I need an aircraft to run the operation, because if we don't do the operation, there's no cash flow. So the first thing I did was renting an aircraft, and then start piece by piece. And then you have to fight the insurance and all this stuff and get the plane back. It's sitting in a field, so it has to go somewhere. And all these little things. So if you achieve that, and that's really Taoism, they define it as living in the moment. I don't know, you can call it this way, or just go step by step in life. And that makes the big goals happen. So the big goal in this sense for me was only to get back to neutral again, where I was minutes before that happened. And that took me about a year to get there. And then you come back to that situation. But I believe after these 17 years, it takes a toll on your health. Over all these years, you have to be careful that it's not overwhelming too much. But I think there's a price you pay as an entrepreneur or a business owner in that way. And if you're, healthy and lucky, maybe luck, I don't know, but to go through it. But you have to understand also, mental stress can be dangerous, to your life.
One of my upcoming questions, just to hone in on that moment, would you say that your toughness to manage that is learned, or do you feel that that was innate within you naturally?
I believe it's naturally, and I believe, coming back to a further earlier question, it's related to the loss of my father. Because even it sounds crazy, what happened with that aircraft, it was far from the experience I had losing my father. So it was not threatening myself in a way that I felt like this is, a very strong feeling. It was just like, you have to go through this. I think if you have it in yourself, you can do it. It might not work because you end up not having any cash, in a very, normal world. So you can do whatever you want, but if you run out of cash or you can't achieve it in time, then at some point you're just going out of business, which can be a big deal, especially when you have a financed aircraft, and you have a lot of debt left and there's no aircraft, in a sense. So I believe strongly, you can learn it to some point, but I think most of the people who are in these positions are there for a reason. Maybe similar to the competition, most people who win world championships are probably there for a reason. And it's not achievable just like, hey, let's take 4 people and let them jump a lot. They become world champions. I don't think that's how it works.
In listening to you, as I'm processing, I'm thinking if it's a little bit of psychology in a way, in that if I have no fear of failing or losing, because many people who are trying to do something significant, often fear holds them back from achieving their full potential. But if there's no fear, because the worst thing has already occurred and you survive that, then it seems like as an entrepreneur, you can be more comfortable with the risk because you're not as concerned about losing. Is that a fair statement?
That's exactly true. And this is very down to the point. I strongly believe the fear is holding, most of us back. Not only in a business, it could be in a relationship, it could be anything. We are afraid of losing, and this comes originally, I believe, it's my strong belief, from the being afraid of dying and not knowing what we actually supposed to do here. So if we start to realize that, we don't have to do anything, that might help us, release from that fear of something could go wrong. If nothing needs to happen, nothing can really go wrong. So, and together with that experience with my father, that's something different. It's hard to explain, if you obviously never experienced it, but there's no more fear. I have a lot of fear. It's not that I don't have fear, but there's not that fear like, what would be the worst that happens? Will I be at status quo? I believe if you have that ability, you can achieve great things, because most of the people, they are afraid, to lose something instead of being excited to achieve it. I believe strongly that holds a lot of us back to actually get their potential, done. Whatever that is, you could be a painter, just saying like, oh, I feel like I could be a good painter, but maybe your environment, your family, they feel like, yeah, what do you want to paint? That's a non-money job. You can't do that. That's fear too. I'm afraid to do something that everybody else feels like, that's nothing. Skydiving business. I remember, when I wanted to skydive, in my own family, my brothers and sisters, they always felt like I'm the only one that's not doing something. All the others became teachers and did normal jobs in a sense. And at the end, I ended up, having a huge business in the United States. So it's not necessarily that it's the big fear of like, wow, these big projects, it can be very small. It could be fear internally, that you don't do small things. So I believe what you're saying. And it's not the fear of dying, it's the fear of losing.
Mike, you ended up selling GoJump in Germany in, I believe, 2017 or 16, excuse me. And then, as you've described, you packed up 17 suitcases with your family in tow and moved to America. Why? Why did you do that?
Well, originally we had I sold it after we were in America in 2017 because we had this kind of crazy idea and we were looking into building GoJump Queenstown in New Zealand because, I was at some point in my life, I had this, kind of vision to jump 24 hours all over the world. And then, we ended up in the US. It just became too much because even with, Europe 9 hours, Berlin in the summer was very busy too. We did about 25,000 jumps and then Oceanside. So it was constant going on. When you wake up, this happens over there. When you go to bed, this happens here, whatever. So at some point I had to decide. And in 17, I basically decided I want to focus on the US market. It was also that we felt like we're going to make it here. Mm-hmm. When we moved over here, it was a really big move. My wife is a midwife. She's originally from, Germany, from Berlin. By then, my 3 children, one was born here 5 years ago. They were all, growing up over there. And I had kind of this vision. I always loved the southwest of the US. I was spending a lot of time out here in that nature. And when this opportunity came up in Oceanside, it was obviously exciting for me, but that doesn't necessarily mean like it's super exciting for everybody else in the family. So we had to have good talks together. And we also just bought a new house in Germany, which was always a dream for my wife. But that's the big part. I don't think it's my part. That's easy. I love to move. But the big part was actually my wife, that she said like, yeah, I'm doing it. I'm coming with you and let's give it a try. Now, 8 years later, you see it like, oh, it's a nice decision, because we ended up in a nice place. But by then, and I always have that example from our neighbor, he's a dentist back in Germany. When he heard that we are moving to the US, he said like, you guys are crazy. You just made it here in Germany successfully, and now you give all this up and go to a complete foreign country and have no clue what's going to happen. And my answer was, that's exactly it. That's why we do it. And it's the same thing I was trying to explain with the fear and achieving things in your life. If you do it for the success or if you do it for the money, we would have stopped in Germany because you say like, hey, it's a great life, But that was never the reason behind. And that's kind of an important part, why you do things. Why do you want to achieve having GoJump America? It's not the money. The money is just a result if you're successful. But the reason why you do it is you want to create something in your life that's kind of interesting and maybe different than what was there before. Yeah, that's the reason why we came here. The reason why I sold Germany was just it was too much. I had to travel 5-6 times over there a year. It was just too much of a burden on all of us.
When you mentioned 24 hours, is that sort of generating income? I know you're not income focused or driven, but in different time zones, both operations going simultaneously, literally building a business as you sleep. Was that the original intent?
I don't know. It was just like, people sometimes have crazy ideas. I think it was just kind of a crazy idea. I thought like it would be a cool thing, if people are jumping with GoJump 24 hours a day, 365 days, and New Zealand is completely opposite to Europe. And then, Europe is 9 hours difference the other way to the US. So it's kind of, that was the, kind of thing. But that was only for a year. We looked into it and everything and, but at the end, we decided not to do it. It was a smart decision.
When you came to the U.S., were you honing in on a drop zone in California specifically, or was it just, you were open to any possibility?
Well, it was by then Rich Grimm owned Tsunami Skydivers in Oceanside, and I knew Rich from the 90s. He was running the restaurant in Eloy when I spent a lot of time in Eloy jumping. And I heard from somebody that he was maybe looking to sell his place. So I kind of met him again in 2004, I think it was, 14 it was. And we started talking, and he said, yeah, he could imagine, selling the place. And that was the reason why we ended up in Oceanside. And we needed something, to be able to legally live in the US and to get a visa. And that's where I ended up buying, basically the business from Rich in Oceanside. It gave us the visa to come over here, the whole family, to legally live here and work. And by now we have green cards, and then 2 more years, I think we're going to apply for the US passport. But that's the story, yeah.
Are you proud you are living the American dream?
Well, honestly, I was never a big, country person, like I'm proud of something, but I'm actually proud to live in the US and be part of this United States dream in a way. I love the country. I love the people that live here. I love the spirit that's still there. You read different, but the daily life is still the US. That's still what I feel, what I see. And yeah, I feel like I'm proud to be part of this and contribute to this to, go on.
Do you allow yourself to feel proud of yourself? Being that you're so busy and building continuously, do you ever pause and go, wow?
Well, James, I'm actually not that busy anymore since December. I don't know if you have heard that, but that's part of the story of myself as well. I ended up in the ER in Las Vegas with a blood issue in the brain, most likely stress-related. I was lucky enough to get out of there the same I'm kind of was before, even, changed my life from the high speed to slowing it down. So I hired couple more people in the company. So basically all GoJump America is running independent from me now these days on the daily side. I'm involved in the back end and still, running it as a CEO, but not so much involved in the daily business anymore. So that gives me a lot more flexibility and time. And that was my original definition of success when I started in Germany, to work for 10 years like this and then be free, independent. And I think I'm pretty close to that now, realizing, what's needed in my life to be able to have a good, hopefully 30 more years ahead, to enjoy. But definitely the question you ask, it's every day it's on my table. I do a lot of stuff. It seems like I'm working a lot, but I'm actually not working that much anymore. I'm more I would call it the brain of the company, who is overlooking all the things. And we have over 100 employees now and 3 contractors, so it's pretty big. But there's great people in the management now that are doing great work every day in all the locations.
Finding managers that will share in your attention to detail, have good business sense, understand skydiving. Has that been a challenge for you to find managers that operate or think the way that you would wish for them to think?
I would say 2 things. One thing is, I call it the 90% philosophy, which is I don't expect everybody to do the same like I do, but it should be 90%. That's a good number to not stress out the people on your perfection or whatever you want to call it. A business owner usually has a kind of a perfection in himself or herself. But if you ask people to do 90%, it works really well. The second thing is, I think it's super important that you take your time to teach them. So take your person, that every single new employee that's coming to the company, not a tandem instructor necessarily, but in the call center, that is customer related, or an ops manager, I'm personally, in a way, train them, not the technical training, but the philosophy. Once you have that achieved, like our chief operation manager, like Steve Edwards, he's overviewing the others. So he has that for himself now more and teaches that to the other people more and more. So that's how you build a company philosophy that I believe, everybody feels like it's important that the customer gets treated nicely. And then it, trickles down to the instructors. It's important that every single passenger is a new customer. It's not like my jump number 8. And I think that's the most important thing, to maybe lead by example and also take the time as needed to teach them and ask them for the same kind of like presence in the moments when they're actually working.
Let's come back to your health scare. This occurred in the midst of negotiation or towards the finalization of Skydive Hawaii's acquisition. Also, shortly after the aircraft accidents in Oceanside, what was that period like for you? And from the outside, it sounds like it would be directly related to stress. There was a lot of stress there, a lot on the line, a lot at stake.
Yeah, I believe it added up over these years. And it started in 2019 when California changed the law to AB5, which meant simply that there's no more free contracting. Everybody had to be employed. And even these days, there's a lot of drop zones in California. They don't do that, but it's illegal now that you pay an instructor as a free contractor in California. So we had to hire everybody, and then I had a big lawsuit from an instructor. It ended up in a class action lawsuit. In California, it's possible that a single person can file a class action lawsuit even though nobody joins. It was a $3.4 million lawsuit, and we won it, after 2 years, but it was very expensive and very stressful. And because we had the documentation and everything. And then workers' comp was another thing, in California. It would be too long to explain it here, but it can be very challenging with workers' comp. How it's used, how it's managed. People stay on there forever. It's very costly. And then in 2022, when the first crash happened, it was the first accident of an aircraft besides the hijacking 2010 that actually happened in my business in 17 years. And then 3 months later, exactly the same thing. Even it was a plane from Texas, not ours, not our pilots, but still it was happening in Oceanside. And all together, it added up to a very stressful situation, obviously with the FAA and everybody, and also to keep the business going. It was expensive to rent the aircraft, and your aircraft was on the ground and destroyed, and the NTSB was involved. So I think all that together contributed to what happened at the end in December, and which was a little bit of a wake-up call for myself to make sure to take care of, my health and my time. I feel now it's about 8 months ago, so I feel pretty good now. Came back to kind of normal with maybe doing 50% of the work, and also not, let yourself be stressed too much about smaller things. But if things add up, I think that's when the challenge starts to put pressure on your body, and also the age might be a factor. I'm 55. It's not the same like when you're 35, and so you have to be careful. Yeah.
Do you feel that, when you're young and your aircraft gets hijacked, you are tough, you manage it, but I think as we all age, or many age, it is, I will say, my parents, as they have aged, discuss feeling greater vulnerability as they've gotten older. My parents have been entrepreneurs also for 20 years, and that stress started to get to them. And the cavalier boldness that they had when they started their business, that softened through time. I'm not suggesting that you've softened, but would you say that that fighting spirit that you had 20 years ago is not the same as it is today?
Yes and no. I would think the fighting spirit is still the same, but not as intense. I agree with what you're saying. As you get older, you start to realize also there's not everything that you can solve, because there's things happening that are out of your control, like the aircraft crashes. We were really analyzing everything, and I couldn't say there was much that, we could really do to change that. So it puts you more in a place where, or it puts myself in a place, I could say for myself, where you start to realize, there's a lot you can control, but there's a lot you can't. And once you realize that maybe more in depth, it gives you the opportunity to be a little bit more like, okay, we just focus on what we can do, and then, hopefully the things are good, happening in a good way. But that's maybe the biggest difference. When you're younger, I feel like, you feel like the more you do, the less it will happen. And I had a couple of experience. Well, Portugal was definitely one with the hijack, but there's just nothing you can really change.
This podcast is sponsored by Beyond Marketing, the digital marketing agency for the skydiving industry. As avid podcast consumers ourselves, we're not fans of ads during a podcast, so we'll spare you the details about why we love building websites and helping businesses show up in Google search results. But just know this, we're passionate about the skydiving industry and how it markets itself. Look us up at dropzone.marketing. Again, that's dropzone.marketing. In your years of running a Dropzone, and we may have already discussed the answer, but what has been your toughest day?
Toughest day. I think my toughest day was in February 2008, looking back. And that was when the bank called me a week before I was supposed to pay the aircraft that they are not financing, because they decided it's not part of their business model after 6 or 7 months. And I had to negotiate with New Zealand because it was 12 hours difference. It was at 2 o'clock or 1 o'clock or 3 o'clock in the morning, negative, in Celsius, negative 15 degrees in Berlin. And I had to do it outside because my son Leon was very young by then, and I didn't want to disturb them. So I was negotiating with them that they are not selling the aircraft, because I had already paid $130,000. And by then, this was, such a huge amount. If they would have sold the aircraft, I would have lost everything. That was probably the toughest few days I was going through. Even it sounds like not as much as other stuff, but it was in the beginning of my entrepreneurship with a lot less experience. I haven't known the book from Ben Horowitz by then about the war CEO, but that was definitely the war CEO I was fighting there, and then sued the bank, and we won again, but it took me 3 weeks, that they finally paid, and then paid an extra $50,000 for all the cost involved. If you have never been there, I think it's hard to understand, these situations it is life or death, not about dying, but life or death of your, success or surviving as a business owner.
Mike, what has been your best day?
The best day is happening every day. I see tandem passengers landing and being so happy what they just achieved. I think it's a mix between they can't believe that they actually jumped out of a plane and just overwhelming emotions. Even after my first jump is now turning 40 years next year, I still see that as the biggest achievement our sport can give to anybody. Most skydivers end up doing a tandem first, so that's the start. And that's what I see. And even after all these years in doing 10,000s of tandems every year, it's still that what I feel like that's why we do it. And that's really, I love it. I mean, I have so many talks. Sometimes I work a day in, checking in people. And it's so great to see these people. And that's the difference we make, I believe, with our sport. Everywhere where there is a drop zone. I mean, people are experiencing something that is very extraordinary. And I always tell them, you will never forget that day when you did your first jump. And it's the same for me. I never forget the day I did my first jump. So that's my best day. It's kind of every day I'm actually out there, which is not that often anymore. But, that's the happiness in the people jumping out of a plane.
Is legacy something important to you? Do you think about that?
Legacy, would you mean like something is left from me when I'm leaving the earth?
Yes.
Yes. It's not important to me at all. It's really, I really strongly believe, I got the presence of that life here, and I enjoy every day, especially here in Southern California. It's such a great lifestyle, and I'm so thankful for that. And once it's over, it's not that important. It's maybe important for my children and for my wife that they feel like it was nice to be around him. But not so much in a sense like, oh, this guy created GoJump America, wow. That's why I actually wrote the book. I think it's better to see when you're still alive that people can read the story and feel like, oh, that's cool, that's interesting. And maybe it gives somebody else the feeling like, oh, I never saw it from this perspective. That could actually help me do stuff, in other areas in their life. So that's maybe what I'm looking for, but not necessarily that people feel like, oh, this guy was doing something very specific. There's many, many people who do much bigger things that we will never hear about, in different parts of the world that are much bigger than, building a business.
Before we talk about the book, tell me about GoJump Hawaii. That is a major accomplishment. Can you just share with us a little bit about how that came together?
Yes. First, I want to say I bought Pacific Skydiving, not Skydive Hawaii, because
I beg your
otherwise
pardon. Excuse me.
they're going to be upset that Skydive Hawaii. But I don't know. Hawaii was always my dream, and I visited Hawaii in 2000, and I think it was 17 or 15 something. And somehow it was always, as we were going before COVID, we were going strong. I was close to achieving a Dropzone on the East Coast as well, and built GoJump America bigger. And then Hawaii obviously is the other end, and Hawaii was always like, I never thought it's coming up because I was not in the position to say like I'm going to start something out there. And then all of a sudden this came all together. Ben Divine, I helped them in, I think it was 2000 or 2 years ago, and they asked me USPA asked me to send a letter to the governor, and because they threatened to shut down the airport. So I did that, and then Ben was involved in all this in the airport saving, and then he reached out to me because Guy wanted to retire, and it was just a few weeks after the second crash, and I was far from anything like doing more. Somehow we ended up having a few chats. It was the missing piece for GoJump America, because we have such a great infrastructure with software and call center and everything, that we needed another, major operation that is a perfect fit to what we have right now. And Hawaii is just so special. I think it's one of the best jumps you can do, really, in the United States. So it's great to have it.
Mike, who do you look up to in the sport?
Well, in the beginning, as I mentioned before, it was Tom Pires was my big person that I felt like he was just doing stuff that I loved. And he was also a little bit a rebel back then in the days. And then there's a few people I really think, or admire is Bill Booth, what he did for the sport. I had once the chance many years back, 30 years back, to have a tour with him in the factory. It was so great. It always stays with me. It was fun. And he's also such a funny guy. I haven't seen him in a long time, but did some great things for the sport. There's in the competition world, obviously there's a few people I really, was always my dream, becoming four-way world champion. So Dan BC and the whole airspeed environment, how they did that. Larry Hill from Skydive Arizona, I admire. Great people. Very nice and still super successful business people, but always stayed the same. I met them in Coolidge many, decades ago, and they have never changed. Yeah, that's, there's a few people out there that, followed their dreams, which I, feel like this is great, and they're role models for the competition side, and then from the business side, definitely Larry and Lil. What they did. They always had that picture in mind I talked about in the first 10 minutes in Germany, that they created Eloy out of, the desert basically, and always were thinking, what can we do to make it better, nicer? It was not only like, how can we make more money? It was more about like, building a coffee shop and building a new restaurant and doing this and have nice grass. And now, it went on like, I think 3 years ago, they built all that nice pond. It's that spirit I really love in people, when they keep doing things just for the thing, not necessarily for becoming richer.
And you followed that example. I mean, you are very generous in your sponsorship of various teams, and not partial sponsorship, full jumping sponsorship. Is that inspired by them?
Yes, definitely inspired by them. I also believe strongly, Bill Booth and Ted Strong at the end saved the sport. That's my way of seeing it, with the tandem, that we are able to, pay the bills for these expensive aircraft and operations. But it's only one part of the sport. If we only see the business and we only go for the money, I think we are missing something. And we have seen that a little bit in New Zealand and Australia for a while, where they were focusing only on the tandem and then running out of jumpers, and at the end running out of instructors. But my belief was always, some money from the business side, which is the tandem for us, has to go back into the sport. And obviously my heart is still in the four-way. Even I'm not jumping anymore, but that's why I'm putting quite some money into the sport back. Also airspeed, they were going to the World Cup in Norway, because it's it's always tough in our sport to spend the money. So I talked to Nicholas, because he was here a few times coaching teams, and that's why they are now training here for 2 weeks, preparing, and be able to do the trip there and bring the gold. That's kind of the vision I have, like some of it needs to go back into the sport.
It's quite full circle to say that you were inspired by, say, Dan BC and Arizona Airspeed. And now, all these years later, Arizona Airspeed is now training at one of your drop zones. It's quite something.
Yeah, it puts a smile on my face. I tell you, I was yesterday and when they started, and it was like, it's kind of, cool. That's how I would call it. Yeah.
Just two more questions, Mike. One thing I think about a lot is crossroads moments where, for my own life, I've had moments where I had to make a decision. And the decision that I made may have been difficult. It was the harder of the two decisions to make, but the reward was great. And I often think, had I not made that course direction, where might I be? What would you say has been a significant juncture in your life that, had you not made that one decision, you may not be where you are today?
Yes, it's very true what you're saying. And maybe it even comes together with the, not being fearful, just trust your life. And for me, that was 2005, after the Spain experience didn't end up the way it was supposed to be for me to become a partner down there. And I had nowhere to go. I was 37 years old by then and had nothing left. So I decided to go to Berlin and just wait. And I was sitting in Berlin for 6 months and drank coffee and was just waiting that something comes up. And for a long time, nothing happened. And out of the blue, Axel was his name. He called me on the phone. It was early January 2006. And he was working for a business in Germany that were renting planes for cargo and skydiving. And they happened to have 3 drop zones. And one of the drop zones was Berlin. And he said on the phone, I heard you are in Berlin. And I was just wondering if you would be interested to maybe run the Berlin drop zone for us. And that's how the whole thing started. And I had never on my mind to become a drop zone owner or, to even run a drop zone like this. But that's how it started. And the reason why it started is because I made that decision, where should I go? So I would go to Berlin because my wife, well, by then, Peggy was there and our first son, we had a difficult time by then. But I went back to Berlin and then stayed there. And that was a big change. That basically led the way to today, why we are talking.
Suppose you had not taken that phone call, where would Mike Vetter be today?
Yeah, it's a good question. I have no clue, but I think it maybe even saved my life. I don't know, but it gave me a good purpose and somehow a direction. Yeah, it was good. It was important.
Mike, let's talk about your book. I'm curious how you found the time to write it with, the acquisitions of Vegas and getting Oceanside going and now Hawaii. When did you start writing this?
I started in October 21.
Wow.
In Sardinia in Italy. I took a week and started writing. And I had this project in my head for a long time. And then my children and my wife kept, teasing me and saying, well, it's never going to happen. You're always talking about it, but it's never going to happen. So at some point, I felt like I want to write it. And that's, I don't know why, because I'm not necessarily a person doing what I'm doing right now that much, going to the outside and tell people and do. But I felt like there's something I can tell maybe people, not only in the skydive world, but, business owners, fathers, hey, it's all normal that it's a big challenge. And it's not just because, this business is big, it was all easy. It was like, oh, this guy is good. I can't do that. Everybody can do it. So that's why I originally put it together. And the second reason, and that's maybe the most important reason for me, is I wanted my children to know me a little better. I mean, you're living daily life with your children, but it's not necessarily about all these details in your earlier life. Even my wife, when she read it first, these first few chapters are all about my, childhood, about my younger age and how I started. And that was a reason, too, that my children can hopefully read it if they're interested and see like their father a little bit in a brighter, or not a brighter, a wider picture, and understand maybe a little bit more what he's doing on a daily basis. And we see, that was the intention.
The name of the book is Vision and Courage, the GoJump America story. The American dream is only a dream if it doesn't kill you.
Yes, it's funny because a doctor friend of us from Sedona, where I got treated a couple times, not specifically for something, but just in general, she said that because when that happened in December, my wife talked to her and what to do and back and forth, and she said that sentence because she's treating a lot of people with these symptoms that are coming from the East Coast management positions to Sedona to calm down and have these issues. She said that one day just out of the blue and said, well, the American dream is only a dream if it doesn't kill you. And I thought that's so true, that fits my story in a way really well. So I chose that as a subtitle. And I think it also makes you interesting. What does that mean? Is it skydiving related or is it's actually nothing with skydiving? It can kill you if you're not careful. If, the challenges out there are big, running a business in America, especially with, there's lots of lawsuits going on and people. And so that's where it came from. Yeah, that's why I chose it.
Mike, I'm really looking forward to reading it. When is it being released?
The release date is going to be December 15, and it should be available everywhere. I'm just working now that it gets available on Barnes & Nobles and Amazon, and then we're also selling it directly because I have quite a few, or a lot actually, customers. When I talk to them when I'm on site, they're interested in the stores. They're going to sell it in their locations as well. But December 15, that's the official date we want to release it. It's coming out in German and in English.
Well, I'm looking forward to reading it. Mike, thank you for this time. I've really enjoyed getting to know more of who you are. I've admired you from afar, and this has allowed me a great opportunity to feel inspired. Your story is truly inspiring, and I can't wait for other people to learn about your story as well. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, James, for having me.
Thanks so much for listening to the 20-Minute Call podcast. Please do follow us on your podcast app so you always have the latest episode downloaded, and leave a review if you really enjoyed the episode. If you want to contact the team, our email address is info@beyondmarketing.xyz. This episode was edited and engineered by Garnet Znydrick of the YouTube channel Blue Skies, Fun Days. Thanks for listening, and join us in 2 weeks for our next episode.